I will be talking about catastrophe, how we respond, and if we respond. So, one of the most popular book genres among teens is dystopian. We see The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, I Am Legend, Fahrenheit 451, and The Giver are all incredibly popular examples. Now, we don't necessarily see one catastrophe happen, but we see a social decline, which many will describe as a catastrophe without an event. Now, we are addicted to catastrophe. When we see a car wreck, we often slow down to look and see what happened. It is incredibly important that we prepare and respond to catastrophe, how we do it, and if at all. But we sometimes create more dangers within the safety measures themselves, trying to prepare us from increasingly complex technology. We are constantly waiting, and we almost desire catastrophe and even death. We want to be free of this paralyzing anxiety that future catastrophe sets upon us. So how do we prepare? We try to conceptualize catastrophe through books and movies. We don't know anything about it, and so we try to imagine it through these stories. But often, real catastrophe comes quieter than it does in film. It's not necessarily one big event, like a mass disease that takes out the whole planet. It can be something that adds up over time. Crisis is the continuation of the status quo. Now, we try to take preventative measures, but it is economically unreasonable to try to avert all crises. We would expend too much time, effort, and money trying to avert all crises. For example, global warming, we see large businesses don't want to switch to zero emissions because it's very expensive. We're marching to an end and we don't really want to stop it. So we try to calculate if catastrophe is worth preventing, and we could do this by trying to calculate the value of a human life. But there's something fundamentally wrong with this. This would they'd say that how much you were willing to pay is how much your life is valued at. But this disregards socioeconomic status. It automatically places someone as a high status as more valuable than someone of a low status. When in reality, it's those who don't have the resources to protect themselves that we need to protect. So we're watching and we're waiting for an inevitable end. We have an impending doom set upon us, so we have to prepare. We watch videos at work on how to properly operate machinery. We take driver's ed. We have fire escapes and elevator help buttons. But how helpful are these when the building collapses? So we try to figure out the best way to avoid catastrophe. Eva Horn presents this idea of futurum perfectum. She says that truth is only revealed in hindsight. Now, since we don't have knowledge of the future, we look at past events that have happened, like past hurricanes, so we can see what they've done, so we can prepare for hurricanes in the future. If you live near a coast, you'll probably have a raised house to prevent flooding. If you live on a fault line, you'll probably have an earthquake-resistant home. Now, Jean-Pierre Dupuy takes this idea one step further. He introduces the idea of projected time, where you pick one endpoint, one future catastrophe that you don't want to go to, and you puzzle your way back from there to now. We try to take measures to prevent these steps from this future happening. But he acknowledges that you can't prevent the future, but you can only slow it. And that in doing this method, you can often open up new routes for catastrophe to happen. But we have to keep one thing in mind, that the future is not a changeable thing because it is not yet determined. You can't change something that's not there to be changed. Now, preventing catastrophe might not be entirely psychologically desirable. We almost desire catastrophe because we have compounding stress and anxiety over it. We live in constant fear of it, and we have relief when it finally does come to pass because now we know how to respond and what to do, even if the damages were incredibly catastrophic. We often often feel powerless to stop it and even paralyzed. We also feel like it'll sort itself out or somebody else will do something. As we see with poorer governments, they don't want to take measures because they feel like other governments will help them do it. Now, we also think that catastrophe is not very likely, and while it's not, it will happen at some point. Now, it's not necessarily that we have a desire for death, but we have a desire to return to safety. We want to be able to be content and without worry. But there is nothing we can do to relieve this stress and anxiety except if we were to remain oblivious. But if we were to do that, we could not prepare and we could not respond to catastrophe, and ignorance would be the end of the human race. So should we respond at all? Well, the safety measures we put in place can often cause unforeseen catastrophic events. Humans now possess the ability to destroy themselves, as we see with weapons of mass destruction. Our technology protects us, but it also endangers us. One example would be the Chernobyl disaster, where a number 4 RBMK reactor lost control and exploded at a low-level power safety test, demolished the building, and littered the community with radiation. This is all to say that we just don't know the consequences of our actions. Now, we see this on a smaller scale. We see it in our lives when we fear losing a job or we fear a bad grade, that we just feel like we can't prevent it. So we depend on God because we don't have knowledge of the future and we don't know what consequences our actions will have. We can't be paralyzed in this fear, so we ask God for help. Sterling has been here to create a foundation rather than sheltering us. They have prepared us for when things go wrong in our life and even in our own school. We prepare by having fire drills, and we even prepare for if we have a school shooter. So we take the things that we've learned and we implement them on a larger scale and in our future. Catastrophe is rampant in our society. Things will collapse and things will go awry, but we have to respond. So we study what we're given in life, why things have happened, and why they have failed. There are a million factors that go into success. And we cannot prevent every failure, but we can try to succeed. By understanding how responding to catastrophe is an exponentially complicated subject, we can better prepare for catastrophe in the future.
Can you maybe provide a little spiritual integration into that? Like biblically, what do you think Christ calls us to? Is what's the difference between being prepared and being fearful, I guess? Like,
Well, if you're fearful, you're often like not wanting to do something about it. You're not wanting to take those actions because you're paralyzed pretty much. And so you're asking God for help to help you respond to these in a good way. Because sometimes we respond, but it's not in a good way. And it's just a reaction from our fear to respond in this way. And so we're asking God for help to see what's a good way to respond, because that's not something we can know on our own.
thank you.
Yes?
What about man-made ideas that can cause dystopias? Like, for example, The Handmaid's Tale, where they tried and failed to create a utopian society.
So you're just wondering, what exactly? Like, you're wondering what kind of...
Would you consider man-made ideas to be a catastrophe of sorts?
Well, that would kind of fall into our category of trying to conceptualize catastrophe through stories. Now, creating a utopia, that would be some sort of social decline, as it's, I think you said it was a failure. So if it was a failure, then that would be a social decline, which would categorize that under a catastrophe without an event, which is leading us down a dark path.
Do you have a favorite dystopian novel?
I really liked Fahrenheit 451.
That's the right answer.
So trying to prepare for and prevent all catastrophic events can become paralyzing and extremely costly. And so is there an advantage to maybe minimizing that and more preparing for how you respond to those in the future and training people to respond to those?
So they're almost the same sort of thing, because you see, like when we're preparing for hurricanes, you see people buying food. That's preparing for when it happens, like while they're in it. And we also see we're sending, like after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, like so much aid was sent there afterwards, because they had like a storage of like just like things to help in that situation. Obviously they were underprepared, but it did help.
All right, thank you, Olivia.